Each month I've been talking about one paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Who Am I? This month it's the 5th paragraph. This is a very important paragraph. Well, each paragraph is important in its own way. This is important because Bhagavan is saying more about the nature of the mind. He said a little bit about the nature, he said about the nature of mind in the previous paragraph. This paragraph he says more. In order to understand what he says in this paragraph clearly and correctly, it's important that we understand it in the context, in the light of other teachings that he's given. One of the first things that's important to understand is that the term mind we use in two senses. We often, often when we talk about the mind, we're talking about the collection of thoughts. That's the collection of all mental phenomena we call the mind. But we also talk about the mind perceiving things. So all the phenomena that constitute the mind, all the thoughts that constitute the mind are objects. The perceiver is the subject. That is the ego. So the term mind we use to refer both to the collection of all thoughts and to the one who perceives all thoughts, the subject. So we have to understand in each context in what sense Bhagavan is using the term mind. As a general rule, when he uses the term mind, in most cases he's referring to the ego. But in some cases he's referring to the mind as a collection of thoughts. That can be seen in this paragraph. I'll mention it later on, but I mean there's some places where he's definitely using mind referring to I, some places he's using the mind referring to the collection of thoughts. So one verse in which he's clarified about this is verse 18 of Upadesha. So I'll just read and explain that verse first. In verse 18 of Upadesha, he begins by saying, eṉṇģṛi maṉam. That means thoughts alone are mind. Or we can interpret it the other way, mind is only thoughts. Either way it can be taken. Yavinum, nāṉ-eṉṇum enname maṉam-ām. That means of all, meaning of all the thoughts, nāṉ-eṉṇum enname, that means the thought called I alone is the mula. Mula means the root, the base, that from which everything else sprouts, and that which supports everything else. And then in the last sentence he says, yān-ām maṉam-āmm. That means what is called the mind is I. So what he's basically saying here is, though the term mind is used as to refer to all thoughts collectively, of all the thoughts, the basic thought, the primal thought, the first thought, the root of all other thoughts, is the thought called I. That is the ego, the subject, the perceiver, the one who perceives all the other thoughts. That is the root, that is the thought called I. Therefore, what the mind essentially is only this I. In other words, essentially the mind is just the ego. Because all other thoughts are coming and going. The one constant element of the mind is the I that thinks and is aware of all the other thoughts. So that it's important to understand that distinction, but the term mind is used in these two senses. Another thing that's important to understand is that what Bhagavan means by the term thoughts. We often use thoughts in English just to refer to the mental chatter that's going on in our mind. That is not the sense in which Bhagavan uses the term thoughts is not limited to just the mental chatter. He uses the term thoughts to refer to any kind of mental phenomena, perceptions, memories, emotions, likes, dislikes, everything that constitutes the mind, all the thoughts and feelings, all the everything, according to Bhagavan, it's they're collectively, they're all thoughts. And so he uses the term thought in the sense of mental phenomena. Any mental phenomena is a thought. And according to Bhagavan, all phenomena are thoughts, are mental. All phenomena are mental phenomena. That's why in the previous paragraph, he, let me think, he said, firstly, to emphasize the point that the mind is nothing but thoughts, he says, niṉaivugaḻ ellam niki pārkindra-podu. If we set aside all thoughts and see, or setting aside all thoughts, if we see, taniai maṉam-ām porulile, there's no such thing as mind separately. So there's no mind other than the thoughts. Ahayal niṇaivu maṉadiṉ sarupam. Therefore, the nature of the mind is only thought, or thought alone is the nature of the mind. And then in the next sentence he says, niṇaivugaḻ tavetu, excluding thoughts, jagam eṉṛģu porul anyamai ille. Excluding thoughts, something called world, there's no thing called world separately to thought. So in other words, Bhagavan is saying the world, all that we perceive is nothing but thoughts. All phenomena, what we call the world is just a collection of phenomena, sight, sounds, phenomena that we perceive through our five senses. So sight, sounds, tastes, smells, and tactile sensations. Bhagavan says in the world is nothing but these five kinds of sensations. And these, according to Bhagavan, they're all thoughts. Just like in a dream, we see a world, and we see ourselves as a person in that world. But when we wake up, we recognize it was all our own mental creation. It didn't, the world we see in a dream doesn't exist independent of our perception of it. So it's all mental. Bhagavan said the state we're now in is no different to dream. This is also our own mental projection. So Bhagavan is using the term thought in a very, very broad sense. So the mind is the totality of thoughts, and all phenomena of any kind whatsoever, all are thoughts. So in other words, everything is encompassed within the mind. We think the mind is here in this body and the world is there outside. According to Bhagavan, the whole world is in our own mind. The whole world, including the body, is in the mind. And that brings us now to this paragraph, in which in the first sentence he says, in the dēhattil, nāṉ-eṉģṟu kiḻambuvadu edu-v-ō, aḳdē maṉam-ām. That means what rises in this body as I, that alone is the mind. That seems to contradict what I've just said. I just said the whole universe, the whole world, whatever world we see, including our body, is all in the mind. But here Bhagavan is saying what rises in this body as I alone is the mind. It seems to be a contradiction. It's not actually. What he means by what rises in this body, the mind cannot rise without experiencing itself as a body. The body doesn't exist independent of the mind. So just like in dream, as soon as we begin to dream, as soon as the mind rises from sleep and begins to dream, it projects a body which it experiences it itself, and it projects the world. All this happens simultaneously. But we experience the mind as if it's within the body. We each now feel we're within this body. I am here, you are there. We each feel ourselves to be located within the body, almost like we're a prisoner within this body. So from that perspective, Bhagavan says, what rises in this body is I. We each now feel I. And this I we feel within this body. In fact, we feel we take the body to be I. So that which rises in this body as I, in other words, that which rises in this body with the feeling this body, I am this body, that alone is the mind. So here Bhagavan is using the term mind to refer to I. That's the ego. So here he's using the mind referring to the perceiver, the subject. Whereas later on in the paragraph he uses the mind in a more general sense. I'll point it out when we come there. The next three sentences are sentences that can be very easily misunderstood if we don't understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly. Because, well, I'll read the sentences and then I'll explain how it can be understood, how it can be misunderstood, and how it should be understood, and why it should be understood in that way. That is, in the second sentence he says, nāṉ-eṉģiṟa niṉaivu, dēhattil, mudalil, enda-v-iḍattil, tōṉḍṛugiṉḍṛadu, eṉṛģu, vicārittāl, hrudayattil, eṉṛģu, teriya, varum. That means, if one investigates in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, one will know that it is in the heart. Why this can be very easily misunderstood. Firstly, Bhagavan is talking about place. He says, if one investigates in what place the thought I first appears in the body, if we understand this in a crude way, it's suggesting that Bhagavan is asking us to look for a place in the body. That is not his intention. Bhagavan often uses the word place in a metaphorical sense. That from which, in the sense of that from which the ego rises, that from which the I rises. So he's not asking us to look for a physical place, a location in the body. That is not what is meant here, because the reason for that is, Bhagavan said in the previous paragraph, the whole world is nothing but thoughts. So that means the body itself is a thought. Since the ego is the first thought, as he said in that verse of Upadesha that I read, and as he says later in this paragraph, since the ego or the mind is the first thought, that is the thought I is the first thought, though it seems to rise within the body, it's not actually rising from the body, because the body comes into existence along with the rising of this I. So the place where it rises is not a physical location, it is the heart. And what Bhagavan means by heart is, again, this is a common misunderstanding of his teaching, but when he's talking about heart, he's talking about two digits to the right from the center of the chest. That is not what he meant. Many, many times he clarified, heart is a name for our real nature, what we actually are. But what is the center of all this manifestation, the I, the pure self-awareness I am, in which and out of which all this appears, that is the heart. So our real nature is the heart. The reason Bhagavan mentioned this, these were answers that Bhagavan gave to Shiv Prakashan Pillai around about 1901, 1902. Bhagavan first mentioned about the heart on the right-hand side only maybe about 15 to 18 years later, when there were a group of devotees who were very interested in yoga and all such things. And since Bhagavan talked about the heart, they used to ask Bhagavan, where in the body is the heart? Is it the same as the Anahata chakra, one of the heart chakra? Bhagavan said, no, heart is not physical. The heart is, what is meant by the word hridaya, what is meant by the term heart, is our real nature, what we essentially are, the very core of our existence. That is the heart. But because they persisted in asking, he then pointed out, when we are aware of the body as I, the point in the body that is the center of that I feeling is here, 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. And he gave a simple example. If a schoolboy says, I will go and run and fetch the newspaper, he doesn't point to his feet and says, I will run. He says, I'll run and fetch it. If he says, I can do the sum correctly, he doesn't point here, he points here. We all point to this place, to our chest, because that is where the I is centered in the body. And we can observe it in very simple ways. For example, if you're walking along a street and suddenly a car honks its horn behind you and you get a shock, if you observe, you'll feel the shock originates from here. We can feel it actually as a physical sensation. This has no spiritual significance. It's just it's all relative to the body. The body is not what we actually are, but so long as we experience ourselves to be this body, we seem to be centered in this body at this place. That is the only, that is why Bhagavan pointed it out, but he said that's not of any significance. Some people thought, oh, because Bhagavan said we have to meditate on the heart, he means we have to meditate here. Bhagavan said meditation should not be on the right or the left. Meditation should be on I. He says that that's very clearly recorded in talks in one place. What Bhagavan means by heart is the pure self-awareness I am. The ego or mind is the mixed awareness, I am this body, but in that mixed awareness, there is the core of that mixed awareness, the heart of that mixed awareness is the pure awareness I am. That is what Bhagavan means by the heart. So when he says here, if we investigate in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, one will come to know that it is the heart. What he means is, if we investigate where does this ego arise, it leads us back to the pure self-awareness that we actually are. Because we can understand this by considering our own experience. The ego appears in waking and dream. Throughout waking and dream, we are experiencing ourselves as ego. When we fall asleep, it subsides, it ceases to exist. Where does it subside? What remains after it has subsided is just the pure awareness I am. In sleep, we are not aware of anything other than ourselves. All we are aware of is I am. We're aware of our own self, our own existence. So that awareness I am, that fundamental awareness I am, is the heart from which the ego or mind arises, and from the ego arises everything else. Everything is a projection of the ego. So the ultimate source of everything is, the immediate source of everything is the ego or mind. The source of the ego or mind is the heart, our real nature, the pure self-awareness. So that is the ultimate, the immediate source of everything is the ego. The ultimate source of everything is that I am, from which the ego arises in waking and dream, and into which it subsides in sleep. So after saying that if we investigate where this I rises, one will come to know that it is in the heart. In the next sentence he says, edu-v-ō maṉadiṉ piṟappiḍam. That means that alone is the birthplace of the mind. Here he's using the same word idum, which means place, but he's using it as in compound with the word piṛappu, which means birth. So literally piṛappiḍam means the birthplace. So birthplace, again, it's not a physical place. It is that from which the ego arises, which is the pure self-awareness, our real nature. And then in the next sentence he gives a clue. This is a very useful clue, particularly for people who are just beginning to practice self-investigation. He says, even if one continue, he says, nāṉ-eṉģṟu karudi-k-koṇḍirundāluṅ-gūḍa a-vv-iḍattil koṇḍu-pōy viṭṭu-viḍum. That means even if one continues thinking, or goes on thinking, even if one goes on thinking, I, it will take one and leave one in that place. That means, what Bhagavan means here is, when we, in other places he says to go deep within ourselves, like in verse 29 of Ulladu and some other place, he says not even uttering the word I by mouth or mentally. So we have to go beyond thinking I, thinking the word I, to what actually is meant by it. But initially, by thinking I, if I mention the name of something, if I mention London Eye, a certain image of a big wheel comes to our mind. If I mention Houses of Parliament, a particular building comes to our mind. So any noun or pronoun, when we mention it, it brings something to it brings a certain image to our mind. If I say apple, we think of a certain type of fruit. So likewise, when we say I, it is drawing our attention back towards that which is denoted by the word I, which is ourself, the awareness that is aware of all this. So even if one goes on thinking, so sometimes people used to ask Bhagavan, should I repeat who am I like japa? Bhagavan said no. But if you want to repeat something, just repeat I. But don't just repeat it inattentively. Repeat it and try to be aware of that which is denoted by that word. So even if we go on thinking I, and try to attend to that which this word I refers to, it will take us and lead us in that place. In other words, it will take us back to our source, to the pure self-awareness that we actually are, to that which is always shining in us as I. So, as I say, these three paragraphs, it's possible to interpret them in a very crude way, but Bhagavan is saying that I actually rises in a place in the body, but we have to investigate where that I rises, but that is the birthplace of the mind. And if we go on thinking I, it'll take us back to that place. We can take it like that, but that is not what Bhagavan means. Bhagavan uses very simple metaphorical language, but we have to understand what he's meaning. Bhagavan isn't, though the language is very simple, the meaning is very subtle. So we have to understand what he means, what those words are pointing to, rather than the immediate. It's not always the most obvious meaning of the words, but it's the correct meaning. And this is why it's very important when we read Bhagavan's teachings, but we don't try and understand things in isolation, because Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple, and they're all coherent. That is, they all they're logically coherent. They all are very closely interconnected. So if we understand this in the light of other things, we'll understand it correctly. But if we try to read this without a background, it's very easy to misunderstand it. And that's true with a lot of Bhagavan's teachings. So it takes time and patience to read Bhagavan's teachings carefully, and we have to use discrimination to work out what are the basic principles of Bhagavan's teaching. Then everything else will fall in place. Because a lot of things that Bhagavan is recorded to have said in reply to people's questions are not actually his main teachings. For example, sometimes Bhagavan referred to the prarabdha of a jnani. For example, when people ask Bhagavan, Bhagavan, should I renounce my job and my family, and should I come and live as a sadhu? Bhagavan said it's not necessary. But then Bhagavan, why did you renounce your family? Bhagavan said it's according to prarabdha. If it were your prarabdha to renounce everything, you wouldn't be asking this question. The fact you're asking the question means you're in doubt, means it's not your prarabdha. If it were your prarabdha, even without asking this question, you would renounce everything. In my case, it was my prarabdha, so I renounced. So there Bhagavan is talking as if he has prarabdha. And when Bhagavan's mother asked him to come back to Madurai, and he wrote a note in reply to her, he said, according to the prarabdha of each person, he who is for that, being there, will make them act. In other words, God makes us each act according to our prarabdha. Bhagavan said that with reference to himself, because his mother was asking him to come back to Madurai. He was saying indirectly, if it were my prarabdha, I would come back. If it's not my prarabdha, I won't come back. So Bhagavan sometimes spoke as if Vijnani had prarabdha. But in verse, in other places, he says very clearly, for Vijnani there's no karmas whatsoever. In verse 38 of Uludunab, he says, if you investigate who is the doer of action, all the three karmas will come to an end. And in verse, I think it's 33 of Uludunabdu Anabandam, he says, Sanchita agamyangal sarabam. Okay, it's easier for me just to explain the meaning of it. Saying that for jnani, the Sanchita and Agamya do not attach themselves, but prarabdha does remain. He says, saying that, Vetra kel-vi-ku vilambu solam. That is a reply said to the question of others. What Bhagavan means here by others is those who are not able to or not willing to understand his teachings, the core principles of his teachings. For those people who say, oh Bhagavan, why did you leave your home? He said, Bhagavan said it was my prarabdha. Bhagavan has no prarabdha. His body may have a prarabdha, but for him there's no prarabdha. So it is a reply said to the questions of others. And then he gives a simple analogy. He says, just like if a man has 3 wives, if he dies, all 3 wives will become widows. You don't get 2 of them becoming widows and 1 of them still remaining unwidowed. They all 3 become widows. In the same way, when the ego dies, all 3 karmas come to an end. So why I refer to that verse here is a lot of things that Bhagavan said were what he describes here as a reply to the questions of others. So when we read his teachings, we have to read with discrimination to understand what is actual core principles of his teachings and what he says in reply to those who cannot grasp those core principles. So what Bhagavan said about the heart being 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest, it is true relative to the body. That is the center of our experience in physical terms. But the real heart is not anything physical. It is the pure self-awareness which is beyond time and space. So saying the heart is to the right side of the chest is a reply said to the question of others. For those who want to understand his teachings correctly, heart is nothing but our own real nature, our true self. Sorry, that was quite a digression, but just to put those 3 sentences in context and to explain how we have to understand these. Then the last 4 sentences of the paragraph, these are very, very important sentences. Bhagavan is saying here, more or less what he says in that verse 18 of Upadesha and what he says in many other places. But the next sentence is maṉadil tōṉḍṟum niṉaivugaḻ ellāvaṭṛiṟkum nāṉ-eṉṉum niṉaivu mudalil niṉaivu. When Bhagavan wrote this, he underlined that in red, so it was always printed in bold type in all the books. That is the main clause of the sentence. That is, of all the thoughts that appear or arise in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. And the word he uses for first thought is mudalil niṉaivu. Mudal has many meanings. It means what comes first, what is basic, what is the foundation, the origin, the cause. So it's the basic thought, the primal thought, the original thought, the causal thought. So this is an example where Bhagavan is using the word mind as a collection of thought, which he says, of all the thoughts that arise in the mind. Whereas in the first sentence he's referring to the mind as I, here he's referring to that space in which all other thoughts arise. So of all the thoughts that arise in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Only after this arises do other thoughts arise. So this thought I, which is the ego, which is what he describes in the first sentence as what rises in the body as I, that is the first thought. All other thoughts come from that. So since the body itself is a thought, it's a thought that appears only after the rising of I. So only after this I, the ego, rises, do all other thoughts arise. So this whole world appears only after we've risen as the ego. In sleep, because we don't rise as the ego, there's no world. In waking and dream, we rise as the ego, therefore there is a world. Because the ego cannot rise without projecting and taking a body as itself, but that body is always part of a world. So the appearance of a body and world always occurs along with the appearance of the ego, but the root of this appearance is the ego. All these things appear only in the view of I. So none of these things can exist independent of I. But the I in whose view they appear, that is not our real nature, that is the ego. So only after this ego, this first thought called I arises, do other thoughts arise. Then in the next two sentences, he says the same thing using different terms. Tan me tōṇḍṛiya pirahe, munile padakeigal tōṇḍṛugiṉḍṛa. That means only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. What he refers to here as the first person is this primal thought called I, the ego, and what he refers to as second and third persons is all the other thoughts or all the other phenomena. So only after the first person appears do the second and third person, do all other things appear, the second and third persons. And then in the last sentence he says, Tan me eṉģṛi munile padake-gal ira. That means without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. That means without the ego, nothing else exists. This is why this is something he emphasized repeatedly in Ulladu-Napadu. In verse 14, he uses the same terms. First person, second person, third person. And he says, if the first person comes into existence, second and third persons will also come into existence. If the first person ceases to exist by one's investigating the truth of the first or the reality of the first person, the second and third persons will also cease to exist. So all other things, all phenomena, all second and third persons, all objects depend for their seeming existence upon the subject which is aware of them. That subject is the first person, the ego, the thought called I. And then in verse 26 of Ulladu-Napadu, this is the place where he says this most emphatically. Aḥdē undayin anetum undahum. If the ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Aḥdē iṉģṛi iṉɖṛu anetum. If the ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That's exactly what he says in this sentence. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. Aḥdē y-iṉḍṛi. The ego itself is everything. That is, the ego is the seed, but sprouts as the tree of this that appears as this vast universe. Ādalal yadu-idu eṉģṛu nādale. Therefore, investigating what this is, o-vidal yavam eṉ-ār. Know that that is giving up everything. Why? Because when we investigate this ego, as he said in the previous verse, if it's investigated, it takes flight. It disappears, because it's got no substantial reality of its own. The ego seems to exist only so long as we're looking at other things. If we look back at the ego, there's no such thing to be found. So when we look at the ego, or when we investigate the ego ceases to exist. When the ego ceases to exist, everything ceases to exist. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. That's verse 26 of Untitled. So all these teachings are very, very closely, I mean, they're coherent, they're all hanging, they're all logically bound together. But that is why I say when Bhagavan talking about a place, the place in the body where the ego, I mean, investigating where in the body the ego, or investigating what place the thought called I first appears in the body, he's referring not to a place in the body, but to the underlying reality. That is what he calls the heart, that underlying reality, which is the pure self-awareness, which is the background on which all these appears, that in which, from which, out of which, and by which everything appears, is that pure self-awareness. That is the light that illumines all this. But the light that reflected in the ego appears as the awareness that is aware of all this. I can. Yes.
I'll give a couple of examples. I've got a granddaughter who's 9 months old.
Yes.
And she appears to be totally unself-conscious. She will look straight in your eyes. And yet she's the most selfish being of all. When you see an animal, it will look at you very cagily and be on the point of either running away from you or attacking you, depending on the relative sizes. And yet that doesn't seem to have any self-consciousness at all. As a musician and artist, I experience a different state of mind when I'm playing music from when I'm in the ordinary problem-solving state of mind. How do you see these things fitting together?
If we are aware of anything, the first thing we are aware of is ourself, because we cannot be aware without being aware that we are aware, and being aware that we are aware entails being aware of ourself. So self-awareness is the basis on which any awareness of anything else can arise. There cannot be awareness of anything without self-awareness. So though a child or an animal, by some judgment we may judge, or it's not self-aware. I think often scientists try to judge whether animals are self-aware or not by, for example, a very simple example, whether they can recognize their reflection in a mirror. But that is awareness of their appearance, of how they appear to others. That is not self-awareness. Self-awareness is the center from which awareness of all other things, the center around which awareness of all other things revolves. So there cannot be awareness of anything without self-awareness. So if an animal is aware of anything, it's aware of itself as that which is aware of that. Animals definitely are self-aware. They're afraid. They feel fear, they have desire, they have hunger, they have a lot of range of experiences that we have. Animals also have those experiences, fear, desire, all these things. A small child, likewise. Children, as you say, a small child is very selfish. They're in their own world. All they care about is food. If they don't get food, they make a big noise. They're not concerned about whether it disturbs others or not, because the range of the phenomena of which they're aware is very limited, and they haven't got a clear, though they're aware of themselves as a body, because they're aware of hunger and all these things, they haven't yet formed a solid identity in the same way that we have. Once, I mean, as we grow up, our identity solidifies, so to speak. So it's just, these are just different conditions of awareness or consciousness, but the basic, that which is aware remains the same throughout. Now, for example, we have memories of the past. We have memories of our early adulthood. We have memories going back to quite early in our childhood. When we remember those things, we remember them as I experienced this. So, though everything else has changed, our body has changed, our outlook on the world has changed, we've acquired so much knowledge and everything, but what is the center point of all these things, which is the I that is experiencing all these things, that remains the same throughout. And even if, when this body dies, we quite likely will forget this entire dream. When we are born, some children may have vague memories about their past life. There are reports of children having certain recollections, and that can be verified with fact. But that's all, those sort of, even if a small child has those, they fade as we grow older. Now, most of us don't remember anything about any previous existence. But I experienced whatever we experienced in previous lives, and that is experiencing this, and that will experience in future lives, though the memories may all go, the I remains the same. So that I is that which is aware. That which is aware of all these things is the ego. That is the one continuity through all these things. Does that answer your question at all?
I feel there is... the I is not a continuity. The I is not continuous. And at times you can feel very self-conscious of the I, or very conscious of I want, or I don't like. And at other times, as I say, I experience this when I'm playing music, it doesn't exist at all. There is no I.
But you say I experience it. There is something. There is an experiencer there.
Well, this is the strange thing. There is the experience, but there's no experiencer. The experiencer only comes when you reflect on the experience. But if you are living the experience, there is no second person there. There is only the experience.
So is the experience...
You may look and say, to me, you can see I am experiencing something.
Yeah.
But if the thing you are experiencing takes you over completely, then at that point there is no experiencer.
Okay.
Only the experience.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying, is the I is not continuous.
You say I can say you're the same person, but that's not what we're talking about now. We're now not talking about you as an objective person. We're now talking about you as the subject.
The experiencer.
The experiencer. So how can there be an experience without something that is experiencing it?
Well, to me, that's playing with words.
Well,
what I feel is you can definitely say that. I could say, I observe you experiencing something. That doesn't mean
but
there are two things, there's you and the experience.
You don't know whether I'm experiencing anything at all. I could be a zombie. But all we know is our own personal experience.
Which is, when you say that, you're talking in retrospect. Because at the moment that it's happening, if you then say, I am experiencing myself walking, you've then separated yourself from the experience.
But even
and then there is an experiencer and an experience and a time gap.
Even if we don't...
The reason I say this
yes.
is because when you're improvising music with another person, it's happening so fast, you have no time to stop and reflect on, did he play the right note, or am I playing the right note, anything like that. You can only play in the instant, in the same way as an animal will react.
Yes.
So instantly, as soon as you threaten it, it will be off.
Yes.
There is no,
right.
To me, there is no truth at that point.
Because your attention is so wholly on what is being experienced, but how can, I mean, now, okay, we're using words now, but we're using words, but we have to, sometimes we have to logically consider what our experiences are. We may be so wholly absorbed in that experience, we are not thinking of ourselves as separate from that experience. But the experience is something, any experience is something that appears to us. To whom does the experience...
That's what I say is playing with words.
But
it only is in retrospect.
Well, then any discussion we have is playing with words. But my intention is not to play with words. My intention is to get to to investigate and get to the bottom of this.
Well, what I mean, for instance, if you're put under a threat,
yeah.
If a big man comes and starts punching you,
yes.
You immediately react like any animal,
yes.
try to defend yourself,
yes.
get away, or take advantage and
yeah.
hit him in the balls or whatever you don't think about it. There's no thinking about it. It happens instantly.
Yes, but you're talking about an experience there. I may not think about how this body and mind respond, but this experience of being attacked by a big man and of this body and mind responding in a certain way, that experience appears to whom? That experience is, in whose view is that experience? There cannot be an experiencer without something to which the experience occurs. There cannot be an experience without an experiencer.
I remind you then of the word remember.
Yes.
Experiences are remembered.
Yes.
Remembering meaning you're solid, you're making something.
Yeah.
You're recreating
yes.
a memory
yes.
of something that happened.
Yes.
While it's happening, you don't remember it, you are it. There is no separation between it and you. Afterwards, you can talk about the experience.
I think you're
playing with words.
Well, no, I don't think you're playing with words. I think when we are watching a film in a cinema, our whole attention is on the picture, on the drama that's happening on the screen. We overlook the screen. You can say, I wasn't at all aware of the screen. I was only aware of the battle or the argument or the love scene or the whatever it was. We're only aware of the fire or the flood or whatever. We're only aware of that. But we cannot be aware of that without the screen being there. We are overlooking the screen. The screen on which the whole experience of life appears is the screen of self-awareness. The one basic experience we all have is our own awareness of ourselves. We cannot be aware of anything else without being aware of ourselves. We may overlook that, but how can you've talked now about experiences, the experience of when you're improvising music or something. It's an experience. To whom is that experience? That's why we'll often ask this question. To whom is this?
Ask me now in retrospect.
Yes.
In theory.
It's not just theory, it's very, very practical.
If you ask me while it's happening, you will take me out of the experience.
I'll take you out of the experience. But
you can't have both. You can't ask me while it's happening who is experiencing this experience.
Yes.
You can only do it afterwards.
Okay, but we're now analysing that experience. Can there have been that experience without that experience appearing to someone? Explain the words. Well, I know what you mean.
Yes. But you're trying to put into words something that is not verbal.
Well, yes. I mean, that's all language. We're talking about things.
All language separates you from the experience. By trying to put it into words and describe something, you're one step away.
Yes.
Also away in terms of time. It was happening in the present, and now you're reliving.
Okay, we are two people now communicating. The only way we can communicate what we're trying to say is through words. But if we try to go behind the words, if you try to understand what I'm trying to say, in order for an experience to occur, it must occur to someone, to something. They cannot be.
You're talking theoretically.
Okay, I'm talking theoretically, but there's a practical purpose for which I'm talking this, because the whole. But what is, as I said earlier, when we remember something, we remember some memory from our childhood. Who is now remembering that? I remember it. Who experienced it then? I experienced it. When you talk about improvising music, who experiences that state in which there's...
That's a good question.
That is the key question.
What I'm saying is, at the moment of being involved in whatever action it is, I'm using that example,
yes.
Or whatever action it is, at that moment, as the experiencer, by definition, you don't exist. Only the experience exists. And then afterwards, you can then describe it as I experienced this, as though there were two things. But at the moment of occasion, there aren't two things. There's only the one thing, which is the experience. And remember, if you're with other people, they're also experiencing it. Each person is experiencing it from within themselves.
All these experiences we talk about, they appear and disappear, don't they?
They appear?
All experiences appear and disappear.
They disappear?
They appear at one moment, they disappear the next moment. To whom do they appear and disappear?
Well, whoever is in the room experiencing it. We all experience slightly differently.
No, I'm not talking about all these other people. These other people, you could be dreaming now. All these other people could be just your own mental projection. I'm talking about you, your experience. In your life is a series of experiences, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. Each experience appears momentarily and disappears. To whom do all these experiences appear?
I feel that this is again, it's an intellectual, theoretical question.
But it's a very, it's a very practical question. We can shut out that experience for a moment, if you can just give us a moment to get to the bottom of it. Because this may appear to be theoretical, but it's actually very practical. If you want to get to the bottom if you want to know the reality of all these things, all experience is experienced by something that calls itself I.
As I say, this is analysis.
This is analysis, but this is an analysis for a purpose, because in order to find out what the underlying truth of all these things, there is no experience without an experiencer. Without knowing the truth of the experiencer, we cannot know the truth of the experience. So we need to know the truth of the subject before we can know the truth of any object. We need to get to the bottom of who is this first person to whom all these second and third persons appear.
Ask yourself that on your deathbed.
May I make a suggestion on this?
No, okay.
I'm not about breaking up.
Okay.
And this is my simple-minded view of this. When we're experiencing, are we aware? Is there awareness? Otherwise, would we experience without awareness?
I think that level of awareness changes.
No, we're not talking about levels. Just that there has to be awareness to experience by definition.
There has to be awareness, yes.
So there is consciousness, and if I'm not incredibly mistaken,
You're spot on.
then that awareness itself, that consciousness itself, in virtue of which I'm experiencing and seeing you, and you are experiencing and seeing me, whether or not I say it is I or not, that is, I think, what Michael is referring to as self or I, and so on and so forth. So just that awareness itself is what we're talking about, not the words afterwards, nothing else which is imputed to it, just that awareness, without which you and I will not be talking, we'll not be sitting. That's it. So on that note of simplicity, I don't really understand. Can we? Is that good enough?
I think you've given a much better answer than I gave. Thank you.
But,
you cut to the core. Yes.
So,
I think for me, the most important thing is methodology. How do you realize the self?
Right.
So, what would be your take on the most essential aspects of that, of the inquiry? In practical terms, what's the best possible approach?
Well, I think first, I think our understanding of the practice is very important, because we can practice as well as we understand the practice. And I think the most important thing to understand about the practice is how extremely simple it is, because it is not one thing investigating another thing. It is just the ego investigating itself. So there's no two things involved there. And the actual, people sometimes ask about the method or the technique, but I think it is too simple to be called a method or a technique. If I ask you what's the method of seeing the light bulb there, what can you say? Look at it. Can you call looking at something to see it a method? It's too simple to be called a method. The problem is we are now aware of ourselves as a person. This person consists of a body and mind. These are things that appear and disappear. So we cannot be anything but appears and disappears, because we exist in the absence of it. So what we call ego is just a wrong awareness of ourselves. An awareness of ourselves is something other than what we actually are. So in order to eradicate the ego, all that is required is to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. In this context, the snake rope analogy is a very useful one, because if we mistake a rope to be a snake, the only way of killing the snake, however much we beat it with a stick, it's not going to die. Whatever yoga or elaborate sadhanas we do, the ego isn't going to die, because it's the ego that does all these sadhanas. The only way to eradicate it, just like the only way to kill the allegorical snake, the rope that appears to be a snake, if we look at it very carefully, we will see what it actually is. We'll see it's a rope. Once we've seen it, once we've recognized that it's a rope, we can no more mistake it to be a snake. So also, if we recognize what we are, we will no longer mistake ourselves to be what we are not. So it is simply, just like to see that the snake is a rope, we just have to look at it very carefully. To see what we actually are, we just have to look at ourselves very carefully. Obviously, we're not an object, so we can't look at ourselves through our eyes. We can't. The only instrument we have for looking at ourselves, for observing ourselves, is our attention. And attention is the basic tool we use to know anything. If you want to know what's written in a book, you open the book and read it. If you are a scientist and you want to know about black holes or about supernova or anything, you have to observe them. How do you observe them? We can't do it so with the naked eye, so they have all sorts of elaborate equipment. But the basic tool that is used in any type of research is attention. But all the tools, including the tools of the five senses, these are all they're tools, they're instruments. But what actually does the research is the attention. So since no tool can help us, it is just a matter of being self-attentive, being more and more keenly self-attentive.
Consciousness is another word for that, is it?
Well, we're always conscious. There's a Tamil text, Kaivalya Navanitam, and in Kaivalya, Bhagavan often used to point this out, in Kaivalya Navanitam, it is said, jnana is not inimical to ajnana. Jnana there means self-awareness, and ajnana means the ignorance about what we actually are. Because we are always self-aware, but just because we are self-aware, we don't get rid of the ignorance. The term that is used in Kaivalya Navanitam says what is required is not just jnana, but vritti jnana. And they give an analogy of there's always fire in the flint, but only when you hit them together you get the spark. There's the sunlight comes through a lens. Only when it's properly focused, the cotton catches fire. These are the analogies that are given. What is meant by vritti jnana, we are always self-aware, but most of the time we're inattentively self-aware. We are negligently self-aware. That is what is called in Sanskrit pramada. Though the self-awareness is always there, the background of all our experience, we overlook it because we're more interested in other things. So it's not just self-awareness or self-consciousness that is required, it's attentive self-awareness. So it's the attentiveness is the key.
Focus.
Yeah, focus. But what is attention? Attention is, we can't attend to anything in sleep. Because there's no multiplicity in sleep, there's only one. So our real nature doesn't attend to anything. But as the ego, we're aware of multiplicity, and we can choose what we attend to. There's so many phenomena here in the room. I can either, you can either listen to the person who's talking, or you can read a book, or you can look at the lights, or you can think of anything. But that is, attention is where we direct our awareness, where we focus our awareness, as you say. So the self-awareness is always there. We have to focus on that self-awareness. That is what is described in Kaivalya Navanitam as vritti jnana. And that alone will destroy the ajnana.
The problem I guess I have is that my mind is constantly causing me to focus away from myself, who I really am.
It's a kind of...
If I think I'm focusing on it,
yes.
I'm really focusing away from it.
Yes.
You know. So what's the principle by which I can get the attention, get attention that really works?
Right, okay. Well, because we have for a very long time been directing our attention always to phenomena. Phenomena are relatively gross. So our power of attention is, at present, it's a bit like a blunt instrument. It needs to be sharpened, to be refined. The way to sharpen it is to try this practice. Just like the way to learn to ride a bicycle, nobody can ride a bicycle by reading a book. Or any amount of theory is not going to help you to ride a bicycle. The only way to learn to ride a bicycle is to get on a bicycle, try and balance, fall, try again. Sooner or later, you refine that skill of balancing until it becomes second nature to you. And then there's nothing easier than riding a bicycle. You can't understand how you didn't know how to do so before. So in the same way, by more and more trying to be self-attentive, we are refining our power of attention. That's one way of saying it. We're refining or sharpening our power of attention. Another way of saying it is, another way of explaining the same thing is, at every moment we have a choice. Either we attend to other things or we attend to ourselves. Phenomena are constantly appearing. Do we attend to those phenomena or do we attend to ourselves, the one who is aware of those phenomena? We have a choice. Because of our Vishaya vasanas, as they're called, that is the propensity or the inclination to be aware of Vishaya. Vishaya means phenomena. Because of that inclination, our attention tends to go outwards. That's our natural inclination. So the more we attend to other things, the more that we are strengthening that inclination, that vasana. But when we try to every time we choose to try to turn our attention towards ourselves rather than towards other things, we are slowly weakening that Vishaya vasana, that inclination, and we are strengthening the opposite inclination, which is sometimes called Sat vasana, the inclination just to be. So we are slowly cultivating vairagya. That's another way of putting it. Vairagya means the freedom from desire to attend to other things, and we are strengthening our bhakti. Bhakti means the love to be aware of ourselves. The more these two are proportionate. The more we're free of desires to attend to other things, the more love we'll have to attend to ourselves, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. So by practicing, we are slowly cultivating the love to be aware just of ourselves. And thereby we are weaning our mind away from its inclination to go after other things. This is why Bhagavan often there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita that begins Sane Sane. Sane Sane means slowly, gradually, gently. That's one of the verses that Bhagavan translated into Tamil. The meaning of that verse is gradually withdraw your mind from all the Vishaya, from all other things, and fix it on Atma, on yourself. So it's a matter of slowly weaning our mind away from its inclination to be aware of other things, and in the process of weaning it away, we are simultaneously cultivating the love just to be aware of ourselves. And that's one way of putting it, but that as we get more and more love to attend to ourselves and more freedom from desire to attend to other things, thereby our attention is becoming sharpened. So it's just two ways of explaining the same process. But Bhagavan said, nobody has ever succeeded in this path without perseverance. Perseverance is the only way. And sometimes when people used to ask Bhagavan, what is any sign of progress? Bhagavan sometimes said, the only sign of progress is perseverance. Why is that? Because we persevere to the extent that we love. And as Bhagavan often used to say, bhakti is the mother of jnana. There can be, the love is the mother of the knowledge, because we know what because if some people may be expert in steam engines, or may be expert in 15th century ceramics, or Mughal miniatures, or people are expert in so many subjects. Why they become expert in that subject? Because they've got a love for that subject, they attend to that subject. The more they attend to it, the more knowledge they acquire of it. So whatever knowledge we acquire in this world, it's our interest, our loving for it, that is the driving force behind that. So in order to know ourselves, we must have all-consuming love to attend to ourselves. And when I say all-consuming, I literally mean all-consuming. It has to consume all our other desires and interests. So I think it's not a matter of methodology, because it is too simple to be called a methodology. It is just an extreme, all that is required is to be, generally we are negligently self-aware. We need to cultivate the habit of being attentively self-aware. In other words, we need to wean our mind away from its interest in all other things, and we need to have all-consuming interest, all-consuming passion to know what is this fundamental self-awareness which underlies all these things.
I think the idea of it coming very slowly, it's a slow approach, and that this will yield results,
yes,
is very encouraging.
Yes.
Because we often want to see results quickly,
yes, yes,
give up.
Yes.
So I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, another analogy that Bhagavan gave, which is relevant in this context, is the analogy of a runaway bull, a runaway cow. A cow has gone out of its shed to graze grass here and there. How do you bring it back? All other practices is like taking a stick and trying to run after it. Whichever way you run, it'll run some other way. Instead of that, a much gentler way is to take a bunch of grass and slowly, slowly tempt it back to its stall. Bhagavan said this path of Atma-vichara is like that. We are slowly, slowly tempting the mind back. So this is a very gentle path, but it requires perseverance, steady perseverance.
Is it also, sorry. I was going to say, does it require, the tool you use is meditation?
Well, what do we mean by meditation? Meditation means thinking, essentially, or attending to something, being mindful. But mindful of what? It's being attentive to ourselves, not attending to anything else. So sometimes Bhagavan referred to it as Swarupa Dhyana. Swarupa means one's own nature. Dhyana means being attentive to, or meditating on, contemplating one's own nature. In other words, being self-attentive.
Self-awareness, is it the same as being feeling that I am or I exist?
Yes, yes. The awareness I am is self-awareness. Yes.
Secondly, you said there is no technique. Isn't self-inquiry itself a technique?
Well, I don't say there's no technique. What I say is it's too simple. If you've got a complicated thing to do, you need a method to do it. But if you've got something extremely simple, I gave the analogy, if you want to see this light here, would you say looking at the light is a technique or a method? Somehow it's too simple to be called that. If you want to call it a method, I don't mind you calling it a method. But I'm saying when we're looking for a method, we tend to be looking for something complicated. But it is so simple. It's just a matter, just like to see this light, we have to turn face towards it. To see ourselves, we have to turn the face towards ourselves. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 44 of Aksharamlai, he says, Arunacha, what a wonder, you said to me, Tirumbiyahandane Dinuahakankan. Tirumbiyahan means turning within. Tane dinam ahakan, seeing oneself, seeing yourself with the ahakan, it means the inner eye, that means the attention. Teriyam, it will be known. So daily we have to, daily means dinam, though it means literally daily, it means constantly. We should be constantly trying to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That's why Bhagavan says, what does it matter however many thoughts appear? Thoughts doesn't mean just the chatter in our mind, it means any phenomena. What does it matter what appears? Whatever may appear, to whom does it, we should turn, if we investigate to whom it appears, our mind turns back towards ourselves. And eventually, and by he says, ipadi paraka paraka, by practicing and practicing in this way, the power of the mind to stand in its source, in its piṟappiḍam, its birthplace, will increase.
When you focus attention on yourself,
yes,
the idea is that one should focus attention on your own self.
Yes.
Self-awareness.
Yes.
But when you do that, other thoughts come.
Yes.
And you've got to push aside those thoughts.
You don't have to push aside those thoughts.
Or come back to...
Yes, you just have to whom do those other thoughts appear? To me. And
the thoughts come and
yeah.
they ask again, who am I?
It's not even asking may be helpful initially, but it's not really necessary to ask. When Bhagavan actually didn't say ask who am I, he said investigate.
Yes.
So investigate to whom. In other words, we've got to turn our attention back to see who is it to whom all these appear.
But at the same time, Bhagavan says, be still, be without any thought. That's the technique.
Well, being how to be still.
So that to extend the period where you have no thoughts at all.
Before, how to be still.
By concentrating on you. And
Yes, yeah, that is the thing.
If any thought comes, you come back to the question, who am I?
Yeah, but the term in Tamil is summa-iru. Summa-iru literally means just be, just be. So we always are. There's never a moment when we are not. Just be means, the implication of just be without any activity. What is the first activity, and the root of all other activity, is the rising of I. So we cannot be still so long as we rise as this ego. How to stop rising as the ego? So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we're feeding the ego. It's only by attending to ourselves, the ego, that the ego subsides, and then we remain in that state of summa-irupadu, of just being. So it's again, it's another way of saying the same thing.
Michael, that's one very good incident of Bhagavan's life.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether you've gone through that, but I want to share with everyone on a very good one. I liked it very much. If with your permission,
Yes.
Bhagavan was in the kitchen where the food is served to everyone. He was in the kitchen. And a very young boy, 12-13 years, he ran like Bhagavan and he asked him the question, Bhagavan, what is meditation? Bhagavan wanted to explain to him what is meditation. Then Bhagavan immediately told one of the cook, bring a piece of that one of that dosa. You know, dosa is an Indian pancake made of rice and lentils, very hot. So he said, bring one large dosa for him. So Bhagavan sat, and opposite to him he sat, and Bhagavan said, I have a condition. He said, what condition? I'm going to say, then you will start eating. And I'm going to say second time, you will stop eating. But you have to finish the entire dosa. So Bhagavan started saying, and the boy started eating the dosa. He was just waiting. Anytime Bhagavan could say next time whom. So he was keep on eating and looking at Bhagavan's eyes and then eating it. Bhagavan didn't say whom, and he finished. Then Bhagavan asked him, while eating, where were your thoughts? He said, I was eating, but all my thoughts were in your eyes when you are going to say next to whom. So he was saying that whatever you do in life, you keep on doing many things day to day, but your attention is always self-attention towards yourself. That is how the meditation, what is meditation? That's the example what Bhagavan told.
Right.
That's what I like. I keep following up. In anything you do, just keep, inwardly, you are eating food, you are driving, you are talking with someone, everything you are inwardly, you are conscious, attentive, that Bhagavan, about that Bhagavan. I think that's a simple way to practice on a day-to-day life. Thank you.
Right, I hadn't heard that. Another analogy I sometimes give, when people say, but how can we be doing this all the time? We've got our work to do in it, and we've got so many other cares and responsibilities in life. How to do that in the midst of all these things? So for that I sometimes give an analogy. If a very dear friend of ours is in an accident, say, and they're admitted in hospital, and they're in intensive care, and the doctors have said they're doing their best to save the life, but they don't know. So our friend is there in hospital. We don't know whether they're going to live or to die. We have to carry on our life in the meanwhile. We go to office, we do all our office work and everything. Though we are doing all the work we have to do, constantly the thought of our friend will be popping up in our mind, and we'll be anxiously thinking, is she going to live or is she going to die? That because of the love we have for that friend, we are thinking like that. If we had so much love, if we had so much care, concern about knowing what we are, but we had concern about our friends, we would be, even in the midst of other activities, our attention would constantly be dwelling on I. Even when we're doing other things, that remembrance of I would be constantly there in the background.
That's absolutely right.
Yes.
Either we are unhappy very often because we are chasing something, and first we stop chasing and then give up what we have, then that's where when the attention can go towards
yes.
Right? We don't want to give up what we have.
Yes.
And on top of it, because we are chasing many things, either we want us to be recognized by someone.
The whole
we need some minimum standards to live. If that is there, then why can't we stop everything?
The problem is we are more concerned about other things, about our food, clothing and shelter, and about so many other things, about the other people, all these things. We are more concerned with all these outward things than we are concerned about knowing what we ourselves are. So slowly we have to wean our interest away from other things, and our interest in knowing what we are has to become all-consuming. Yes?
This continuous self-attentiveness,
Yes.
I don't still quite get it, because if you are for you to be continuously self-attentive, surely, and you're practicing self-inquiry, doesn't that mean that you are constantly saying, well, in my case would be, you're constantly asking you're constantly posing the question to yourself, who am I? In so doing, doesn't that mean that you are repeating who am I continuously?
No.
It's not the practice?
So supposing there's a newsletter here. Supposing I ask you to see what's written in the newsletter. You don't sit there and ask what is written in the newsletter, what is written in the newsletter. You pick it up, you open it up, and you read what's inside. Bhagavan didn't say we should ask who am I, he said we should investigate who am I. So if Bhagavan asks you, investigate what's written in this newsletter, You pick it up and you read it. Asking who am I is not the point. I mean, that question, it is the curiosity to know who am I that is the driving force. But it's not a matter of asking the question, because merely asking the question, merely saying what is written in the newspaper, what is written in the newsletter, what is written, is not going to get us anything. We have to, our attention has to go towards it. We have to open it and read it. So also, we need to open the book of our heart. We need to turn our attention within to see what we are. So it's not questioning who am I, it's investigating who am I. That's why it ultimately, Bhagavan said, it all comes down to attention. Attention is there's a term in Sanskrit, Chit Shakti. Chit Shakti means the power of awareness or power of consciousness. And that Chit Shakti is said to be the power that has created this whole world. Why is that? It's because we attend to all these things, but all these things seem to exist. In dream, how the dream is created, it's created out of our own mind, by our simply, by our interest in other things. We create a whole world, and we undergo so many experiences. And the wonderful thing about dream, we not only create the whole world, we create ourselves as one of the people in that dream. That is why we seem to not have control over it, though it's our own creation. Because we take ourselves to be a creature, we lose control over our own creation. So it is our attention that creates the dream, it's our attention that creates this world. The same attention, if we turn it back towards ourselves, it will reveal the supreme knowledge and the supreme happiness, which is our own real nature.
But the only way you do that is through self-inquiry, isn't it?
Yes, it's called self-inquiry or self-investigation. But it's not just asking a question. It's actually looking within our own heart to see what we actually are. Because so long as our mind is dwelling on the question, who am I? Who am I they're words or thoughts, which are something other than us. They appear and disappear. So nothing other than us can be what we actually are. So we are not that question, who am I? We are that which the I refers to. So what is that? It's not just asking a question, we've got to look at it to see, we've got to look at ourselves to see what we actually are. It's a very, very subtle process, but the more we practice it, the more just like you can learn to ride a bicycle only by trying to ride a bicycle, we can learn to investigate ourselves only by trying. And the more we try, the more clear the practice will become to us. But actually, none of us know perfectly what is self-attentiveness, because when we know what is self-attentiveness, we will know what we are. Because now, though we are trying to withdraw our attention from all other things and focus it on ourselves, but now our self-awareness is mixed up with adjuncts. I am not aware of myself just as I am. I'm aware of myself as I am Michael. Michael is the name of this body. And within this body there's a mind. So this bundle called Michael is now mixed up with this awareness I am. So now when I try to focus my attention on the I am thereby slowly separating myself from Michael. But because this Michael and I am are so mixed up in my experience, and because my power of attention is still relatively crude, relatively gross, it's not sharp, it's not yet sharp enough to be able to distinguish the I am from all these adjuncts. But by more and more by practicing more and more, our power of attention becomes more and more refined and subtle, and we come closer to the point where we isolate I am, our own self-awareness, completely from awareness of all other things. So it's a path that reveals itself. We learn as we go along. And Bhagavan sometimes said, when we are turning our attention back towards ourselves, we are turning our attention back towards the light that illumines all this. Because how all these things are seen, we have a physical light. Even if the physical lights go off, even if we're sitting in the complete darkness, we're still aware. So there's a subtler light than the physical light. That is the light of awareness. So when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are turning our attention back towards the original light. So that light of self-awareness itself will lead us on this path. That is why Bhagavan said, Guru is within you. Guru is always shining in you as I. There was a devotee of Bhagavan called Janaki Mata who used to often come from Tanjore and to visit Bhagavan. One time when she had come to visit Bhagavan, she saw he was returning from the Gosala, that's the cowshed, and there weren't many people around, and she thought this is a very good opportunity. So she approached him, she fell down at his feet and she caught his feet. And Bhagavan looked down at her and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm catching the feet of my Guru." He said, "These are not the feet of your Guru. This is a perishable body. So if this perishable body were your Guru, if these feet were the feet of your Guru, it's not going to last. The feet of your Guru are what is always shining in you as I. Catch hold of those feet. Don't let go of those feet. Those feet alone will save you." So Bhagavan is constantly takes every opportunity to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So a real Guru is what is shining in us as I. That is the real form of Bhagavan. We mistake this body to be Bhagavan. Bhagavan says, "I'm not this body." But because we take ourselves to be a body, we take this body to be Bhagavan. Bhagavan said, "I am that which is shining in all living beings as I."
Because we need to finish up very soon, just to finish this off, so would it be correct to say that we need to basically attend to that awareness which we are?
Yes.
Always aware.
Yes.
We just need to attend to it more and more.
Yes.
And more.
We need to attend to that which is aware. That is to ourselves. Because the trouble with saying awareness is, we use awareness in many different contexts.
Basic awareness.
Yes. That which is aware is the subject that we have to attend to.
We do have to push ourselves, don't we?
Of course we have to push ourselves, because the natural inclination of the mind, there's a term in Tamil, manapoku, the natural flow of the mind. The direction in which the mind naturally goes is outwards. So we've got to change that manapoku, that flow of the mind, from going outwards to going back within. So it takes...
It's a continuous struggle.
It is a continuous struggle, because the natural tendency of the mind is to go outwards. Because as this ego, we can survive as ego only by being aware of other things. As soon as we cease to be aware of anything else, we cease to be the ego. It happens every night in sleep. But we're confident we're going to come back again, so we happily go to sleep. But if we try to be aware just of ourselves, in waking a dream, the ego is like putting our head under the water. We're desperate for air, so we pop up again. So every time we try to turn our attention towards ourselves, for the ego, it's like putting its head beneath the water. It can stay underneath for a few seconds, and it has to come up again for fresh air. In other words, it has to go outward, because only by clinging to other things does it survive. So attention to other things is the food on which the ego is living. So we've got to slowly wean the ego away from the food that it requires for its survival.
Sorry, Michael.